today's video, it's an early March update on some of the main tropical style plants in my garden here. So hopefully it'll be reassuring to those of you who have just started growing these plants. It's perfectly normal if they look a bit rough at this time of year, but I want to just go through exactly where they are now, which ones have started growing, and how best to set them up for some amazing summer growth this year. First things first then, we're looking at a Japanese hardy banana, Musa basjoo. And at the minute, it's a slightly uninspiring looking stump just here, but in the summer, it looks something like this. So you might have heard of the hardy banana before, and chances are, if you know someone who's grown bananas outside, it will be the Musa basjoo. It's a root hardy plant, but the bit that's above ground isn't quite as tough as the rest of the plant. So if you live in the middle of London, or a very sheltered garden, you might be lucky enough to have some green leaves over winter, but generally speaking, it will look a bit tatty over winter, and if it's a colder than average winter, the part that's above ground can actually die off altogether, so the plant will reshoot from the base. So one of the main battles with this plant is if you live in a colder area, it's keeping that growth above ground. It's keeping the pseudostem so you get an even bigger plant faster the next summer. So one of the first things you might be thinking is, have you protected it this winter? Well, I haven't full on protected it, no. So just to quickly summarise the main methods of protecting basjoo, what I used to do, full on protection, basically put 4 canes around the plant, wrap fleece around those, pack the whole thing with straw, and then put a plastic pot or some kind of plastic over the top of it. So that way it keeps the rain off it, but also you've got an enclosure that's breathable. So that plant will hopefully stay dry, and it will also keep most of the winter cold off it for the winter months. And that way, when you unwrap it again, you've definitely got a good chance of keeping that height that's above ground. However, yes, that's great if you live in a cold place, if you've got a small plant, or if you want to be organised at the start of winter to avoid faffing around throughout winter. I wasn't organised and I have been faffing. So basically what I've just been doing is covering the whole plant with a layer or two of fleece on the coldest nights. So how I've done that is basically just check the weather app. If it looks like it's going to be freezing or just below, I've kept some old bits of fleece in the garage and I just put those over the top of the plant. So I've also left the old leaves on it. Rather than chop them off and tidying the plant up too much, they actually help protect that pseudostem just a little bit, and they also help prop the fleece up a bit more, give it a little bit more sort of ventilation. And so far, touch wood, that pseudostem's still firm, it's looking good. But anyway, it's now early March, so you're locked into whatever method of protection or lack of you chose for your banana. So to address a few questions you might have, if you protected your banana plant all winter, you did it properly, you did the full thing, wrapping the whole banana plant up, you might be wondering when do you remove that protection. I would just wait. I know we get some milder days at the minute, but wait till probably early April and then see what the temperature looks like for the next 2 weeks. And at that point, if there's no deep cold forecast, I would unwrap the banana plant and just have some fleece on standby in case we get any sub-zero nights. But hopefully by late March, early April, the worst of the cold should be behind us, and any frosts or sort of freezing spells then should be a lot shorter in duration and a lot less damaging to the plants. So your banana plant, it might push some leaves out, it might be starting to send those green rollers up. Mine is just about now, but those leaves are very unlikely to actually make it to summer. The first leaves that come out are very thin, a bit tatty. We've still got frost coming, we've still got windy weather. They're just going to get absolutely shredded. Don't worry about it, because when it comes to around May time or June, which sounds absolutely ages away, but I can guarantee it won't be, the extra sunlight, the extra heat, the plant will really start pushing out some proper leaves then. Those leaves, they'll still get shredded by the summer winds, but you know, that's part of living in the UK, unfortunately. So if you've wrapped your banana, I would just wait probably another month to really be on the safe side. By all means, check your plant, make sure it's got enough ventilation, it's not rotting away. But other than that, just leave it and then take that protection away early April and you'll be set up for another summer of amazing growth. Now, if you didn't protect your plant and you've just been putting fleece over it on the coldest nights like I have, then keep doing that. Keep putting that fleece over it whenever it freezes or whenever there's a hard frost forecast, and any good work you've done up to now will be extended. And again, you'll have a really good start for this year's growth without putting all the effort of actually wrapping the plant all winter long. And thirdly, if you didn't protect your plant, you might have got away with it just fine. And the way to tell is just basically to feel the pseudostem. And if it's firm, your plant's alive. It might be a bit mushy at the top, but you can always chop that mushy bit off and get to the harder pseudostem below it. Worst case, if your Musa basjoo has died back a bit above ground or that pseudostem started to turn mushy, it's not necessarily the end of the world. There's a good chance that it can sprout back from the roots. It all depends on how mature the plant is. If it was a good sized clump, I would say there's a pretty good chance it will come back. And the good news is those new shooter stems, they'll grow really quickly with all the energy stored underground, and they won't look tatty at all. They'll be completely fresh and green. But that's pretty much a summary of the main methods of protection and what I'd do now. I think in summary, basically, keep doing what you're doing. If it was wrapped up, leave it wrapped up. If you've been fleecing it, keep fleecing it at least for another month or so. And at that point, when it does start growing, starts pushing leaves out, don't worry about them being completely tatty. In all honesty, if I get any leaves really before the middle of June, if it starts up decent before then, that's definitely a bonus. But honestly, for the amount of growth these plants put on over the summer, it's absolutely worth them looking tatty for pretty much half the year. The next plant I wanted to share with you is Dicksonia Antartica, the Tasmanian tree fern. Now, I have done several videos looking at tree fern care, winter protection, pretty much every aspect of growing them in the UK. Check those out if you want a more detailed response, but today I just wanted to quickly show you what the plants look like now and what I'll be doing over the next couple of months. So this is the trunk that I actually planted last May time, and as you can see, it's done well in its first year. It's put out quite a few fronds, they're a half decent size already, but in winter it has seen some damage. So you get some browning on the fronds, bits might have snapped off them. Yes, we've had a mild winter on average, but there have been some really cold spells, not really cold, but quite cold spells, sub-zero temperatures, we've had snow a few times, and then more recently we've had those brutal winds. Pretty much every week we've had winds ripping through the garden. Those really aren't the conditions that tree ferns like. So yes, the existing fronds will have damage on them. And if you got a tree fern last year for the first time, you planted it in your garden, it's perfectly normal for it to have some kind of browning, some damage to the fronds, but don't worry about it. When it comes to protecting, I haven't actually done a lot for these tree ferns this year. There was only one really sort of cold spell when I wrapped the top part of the trunk, but for most of winter, all I've done is put some straw in the crown. And that's basically to cover up the area to protect the new fronds, the new croziers that are just starting to form. And that's more crucial over the next couple of months. If you're new to growing tree ferns then, the reason why I say don't worry too much about the existing fronds is because they send out a full set of new ones in springtime. Generally speaking, it's around May, but it can sometimes be earlier or later, particularly if it's a new trunk in your garden. They can be a bit disorientated or a bit jet lagged and they can send them out at a different time. But generally speaking, it's around May. And the issue is those new croziers, especially as they begin to unfurl, they're very tender and very susceptible to damage by wind or frost. So I try not to encourage them too early. Yes, I try not to let my tree ferns dry out, but equally I'm not completely pampering them yet. I don't want to hurry those fronds up because once they start actually flushing, it's really hard to protect them. They're so soft and so fragile that putting fleece on them would probably do more harm than good. So at this time of year, the crucial thing is keep that crown protected, because those new croziers are essentially going to move into position. That vulnerable part of the plant is going to move up in the crown. It's important just to have something there to keep the worst of the frosts off. So hopefully by now we're away from the deep cold of winter. Yorkshire Chris said that first, it's not me. If there is any bad weather, it's Chris that caused it, so blame him. But hopefully by now, pretty much all that deep cold is behind us. And all you want to do is keep the frost damage away from those unfurling croziers. So we just want to keep a bit of straw over it for maybe the next month or so. I pretty much leave it on until I can see those new fronds just starting to go. And at that point then in May, it's pretty much time to take the straw away and let it do its thing. Yes, there might be a late frost, but I think you'd be very unlucky if it's something that completely zaps them. Usually I just roll with it, and if it does cause a bit of damage, unfortunately it's just part of it. But I suppose the other crucial thing about tree ferns at this time of year is don't let them completely dry out. So yes, I said in my video about a month ago, keep your tree ferns watered in winter. It's going to be a very dry winter. And then it proceeded to rain really heavily for about the next month. So I won't say that again, but what I will say is, if there is a dry spell, just keep an eye on them. And if it starts to look a bit dry, if the trunk's looking a bit grey, then really start to water it maybe every week or so. Hopefully though, it'll be a nice spring, plenty of sun and the odd shower, and they'll be just happy. The next stop then is Tetrapanax, or Tetrapanax papyrifer rex. An absolutely incredible exotic, well in summer anyway, at this time of year, like the basjoo, a little bit underwhelming. But this is a plant that's well worth growing for those massive leaves, although at this time of year they can be pretty much deciduous. So this one here, it's grown under the shelter of these palms and it has got a few green leaves left. The ones closest to the house are pretty much like a twig. Those are quite exposed. open to the hard frost, and those definitely, the leaves get zapped earlier and they take longer to grow back. However, there is one under the overhanging trees at that end of the garden, and that's got more bigger green leaves on it. So how your Tetrapanax looks now completely depends on where you are in the country, where that plant is in your garden, and how cold a winter you've actually had. So as you can see, this is pretty typical of what they look like now. You will have new leaves pushing through all the time, and over the next couple of months, you don't need to do anything to it. I have done a full care video about growing Tetrapanax, definitely check that out if you're interested, but basically when it comes to winter protection, I look after small plants less than a foot or so tall. I usually keep those in the greenhouse, but as soon as they're planted out in springtime and they grow that first summer, they get to around 1.5 foot, maybe 2 foot of trunk. At that point then, they're very tough plants and I would pretty much leave them to it. So once they're in the ground, like I said, they're tough, they don't need protection, and if anything, they're more likely to get damage from protection, just like humidity might rot them away, than if you just left them to it. So that's exactly what I'll be doing with this one here. Yes, it'll start to push more new leaves as we get some milder days. Those leaves might get zapped by upcoming frosts, but I know as soon as it gets to May, as soon as the frosts are behind us, those leaves will get bigger and bigger with more and more sun. So really, it's a plant, you leave it to it, have faith in it, and it will grow back, and it'll be so much bigger this year than it was last year. Next up then, we're looking at Trachycarpus palms, specifically Trachycarpus fortunei. They're a very tough, very hardy exotic. They don't need protection in the majority of the UK. They're great for creating a jungle style effect, are one of my top recommended exotic plants for beginners. And if you're interested, I've got loads of videos all about these on my channel. So today I want to look quickly at the winter damage. And whilst the actual plants themselves can take severe amounts of cold, you might start to see at this time of year some damage to the older leaves, maybe a bit of yellowing, probably the ends have started to go a little bit brown. That is perfectly normal. I think with these Trachycarpus, whilst they can take the cold, it's just the repetition of our sort of windy, cold winters, all those frosts, all that wind, it builds up and it can damage especially the older leaves. So if you have any leaves that look like this, bit of yellowing and the brown on the ends, don't be in a rush to chop them off, because what you'll find is, as we get to around mid-April, some warmer days hopefully, a bit of sun, all palms green up a bit. So these yellow leaves, the ones that look a bit off it, can certainly look more vibrant, more like they should do. So don't worry about chopping them off too early, because otherwise you risk losing the resources and the nutrients that are currently in those leaves. So wait for another month or two at least, and then, and only then, chop off the ones that are completely brown, or at least mostly yellow and brown, and you won't be doing the plant any harm. But for now at least, just leave the plants to it, accept there's a bit of damage. I know if your Trachycarpus palm is your prized exotic, if it's the only exotic plant in your garden, it's going to be something that you worry about. Is there anything more you can do? At this time of year, as long as there's no external factors like it being sat in a waterlogged lawn or anything like that, just leave them to it and they'll start to look fantastic in no time at all. And at the end of the day, in summer, you'll have so many more plants around these, you won't even notice minor imperfections like these. It's only really in winter when you actually see them and it really bothers you. One more thing that I would add about the palms, I've had a couple of people message me asking when to start feeding them. Don't worry about it now. Personally, I wouldn't do anything until mid, maybe late April, probably even early May. The thing with palms is they can't actually use the nutrients, they can't start using the food until then, until we get some sunny, warmer days, maybe pushing 15, 20 degrees. So pretty much if you feed them now, while there's still sub-zero nights and cold days, they're not going to make use of that food. So you're pretty much just chucking your money away. So definitely wait until they're actively growing and then you can start feeding them again. And I suppose worst case is if you overfeed them now, all they're going to do is just push out floppy new growth that won't be able to take the harsh cold winds and the weather that we're having at the minute. So you really don't want to feed them now, just let them do the thing, and then in another 6 weeks or so, it's time to start feeding the garden as things begin to grow. But anyway, the plants I've shown you so far are ones that have got varying levels of winter damage, or ones that are completely dormant for at least another month or so. But now I want to show you two plants that are already starting to wake up. First things first then, Gunnera manicata. So in summer, this plant looks like this. Whereas now, in winter, it's basically just a collection of old leaves. And as I mentioned in my winter preparation video, I use the old leaves. This is something that most people do grow these. I use the old leaves to protect the crown. And as you can see in this one here, the leaf I had protecting this bit blew away recently. So I'll be covering this with some fleece just to give that crown that's exposed there a bit of extra protection. So what you'll find is these Gunnera plants, at this time of year, if we get more of these mild days, they will start growing. So you might start to see some new leaves, a bit of green, you can probably see under here, a bit of green, starting to come out, starting to push through and enter the world. But what we need to do is try to keep the plant protected for a bit longer at least. And one thing that I did mention in my Gunnera video last year is that it's well worth protecting those new leaves, the first ones that push through, as chances are those will be the biggest leaves that these plants can produce. So for a plant that you grow to create the big leaf and that jungle effect, I think it's really important to protect the first leaves from these frosts. So the crucial things are, don't feed your Gunnera yet, you don't want to hurry it up, keep it protected while you can, and if those leaves have started to grow, if they've started to push through the old leaves, then at that point there's nothing you can do to really slow it down as such. I will just keep some fleece handy. So if the temperatures get to below freezing, it's well worth just putting a fleece over the whole plant to protect those leaves as much as you possibly can. But either way, it's one of the first plants to really start growing, one of the first big leaf plants anyway, and it's something I'm really looking forward to see just how big they get this year. Lastly then, let's look at Persicaria. These are Red Dragon, but I also grow Purple Fantasy. They're an amazing sort of exotic filler plant, and they're one of the earliest plants to start shooting in spring. So these ones are already pushing the leaves through. I've got some that are further on than these, further down the garden, and others are just showing the red buds. But they're a plant that doesn't really need any sort of encouragement to grow in spring. A few mild days and they start pushing the leaves out. Yes, they are vulnerable to frost, but I completely do not worry about these plants. They can take so much frost, so much damage, and they'll just bounce back from it. So these first few stems that come through, no doubt they'll be chopped back by the frost, but I know that within a matter of days, if not weeks, they'll be replaced by new, enthusiastic stems pushing through. So these are an exotic plant that I pretty much just leave to it. This is what they generally look like this time of year. They might be cut back and be blackened again, but either way, I know come May, they'll probably be a foot tall and ready to take over again. They're a cracking plant, a great exotic filler plant, and one that definitely form a big part of my exotic borders here. So anyway, that's it for today's video. Hopefully it's been helpful. If you grow any of these exotics, you got questions, just leave me a comment below. But anyway, let's look forward to next weekend. Longer videos will be starting. I've got some great ones coming up and I hope to see you then. See you soon.